A wimble, a wimble, a wimble, a wimble. Ooh, it's working. By gum. Ooh, what are we doing? Ooh, that was close. Let's move that back a bit. You do not want to know what the computer is balanced on. And the light source is there. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Have a CPU detected? You may experience performance issues. I'm sure I will do. So, I'm going to do that to hide the graphics from me. And I'm going to pop out the chat. So that becomes the big thing for me. And hopefully that says all I need to do. And if I need to get back to the Wi-Fi, I can. How are we all doing this evening? Hello, everyone. So, first things first, Iron Brew. It's been a long day and a long way getting to here. And I get more fun tomorrow. Hello, Carl Goswick. Hello, Jess P. Hello, Atros Verdon. Hello, Tanya Velica. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Dan Freeman. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hi, Glenn. Dan, don't you know that it's always Toronto is the center of the universe? Okay. All right. Why is Toronto time coming up? That's slightly worrying. Okay. Howdy, Stafford. Hello, the G40. Hello, Colin Cameron. It's a bit rude on the reply there, Dan. Funny, but rude. Oh. Hello, John Sykes. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Hope everyone's good. So, as a rule, this week, because I am doing so much driving around in this period of September and pottling all over the place, I don't have that many books with me. In fact, the entirety of the books I have for me are behind me. I might talk about them in a bit. But they're all known to you. I, of course, have a lot of books on my mobile phone in the Kindle, but that's currently on charge because that hasn't been getting enough charge today. And hello, Daniel Poldix. And, well, to get an idea of how almost later this was, if you look out there behind me, you can see a red object. That red object is my car. That's pulled up. It is here. I have got the computer out. We are set up in the kitchen because that is where the internet is. Oh. I always forget your wall there. That's so weird compared to ours. This one is one above a cooker. It's gonna be weirder than all the rest. But yeah. Hi JF. Hello RG. Hello this is Shaw. Hello everyone. So how are we all doing this week? What questions do we have? Have you seen the 60-second video that's gone up, which was on... What was it on? The one this morning would have been... Well, it would have been... What's it called? Mountbatten Pink. Drinking brew from wine glass. Yes, I am known to be classy as an individual. Yes, we can all wish Drakenfell a swift recovery. I'm also starting to believe that I need to take very careful care of my friend and keep an eye on him. He forgets he's human sometimes, and does have frailties. John Sykes, first question. Why did the USN cruiser seem to have a glass jaw when it came to Japanese torpedoes and never figured them out until after the war ended? Well, they seem to have a glass jaw mainly from the perspective of during the early campaign, they are caught moving in straight lines or unawares. At Tassafaronga and Savo Island, this is very, very much the case. There's also the fact that their hull's been designed around DLRs more likely, so a lot of the key elements were built deeper in the hull, under protection, which meant they would have been gunfire. They would have been very resistant against, but it means they're more exposed against torpedoes. This is the reality. There is often no good decision. Even in a scenario where you've got as much weight as you want, as much money as you want, you don't have to worry about anything like that. Well, A, you'll probably end up building some sort of super battleship, but B, you can't afford to do that if you want to build from number of yards, etc., and what you want to operate in terms of a cruiser. So there's always going to be a compromise. There's always going to be a compromise somewhere. And in the Americans, they compromised, which gave them very good resistance against air attack, very good, which they hadn't been intending for, but it did, very, very good resistance against gunfire, especially long range and medium range gunfire. But it made them very weak against a certain type of torpedo hit. And if you're unlucky enough to get hit in those spaces by a torpedo, you were absolutely SCREWED. Completely. Fully frigated. Drak managed to make himself ill. Drak, being usual Drak and very thorough, and he's released the details today, but at one point he was worried he might have COVID and all sorts of things. But he released the details today, and basically he decided he was doing all his work for one of his videos, and it was on the Sailors video, and the burning of the plastics and the chemicals managed to make himself ill because he didn't do it he didn't ventilate the space or wear masks. And this is quite strange because normally Drak is probably one of the most, I know he and I will both clamber up masts and do all sorts of weird things, but we've had a lot of training, a lot of experience. We know what we're doing. We don't take stupid risks. We always do calculated risks. We're very big proponents of taking risks carefully. And so it's very unusual for him to have done that. So I just presume he's so swept up in the joy of what he was doing, he forgot the problems of what he was doing. But hopefully it'll be better soon. And yeah. Minus 1640. What is Mountbatten Pink? Mountbatten Pink is one of the paints tried in World War II. It starts off with Mountbatten trying it on HMS Kelly, which is his destroyer leader. And then it gets adopted by the SAS, by aircraft, and even HMS Kenya at one point. And basically the idea is painting your ship pink, or a certain kind of pink, makes it blend in with haze. Unfortunately, it does make it more visible in the middle of the day, but for the rest of the day, it makes it very, 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 very difficult to pick out. So it's one of those things where, how masculine are you feeling? Unfortunately, I have to admit, and the story as I put in the 60-second video, that when I was younger, when I was first told about it, I thought, and I was being told about it by a British Army officer, I thought it was winding me up. Because as anyone who's ever worked with the British Army or travelled them internationally in airports will know, for some reason, them and salmon-coloured chinos are a universal requirement. I do not know where they get these. I have never seen salmon-coloured chinos in the shops anywhere. I have been in Marks and Spencer's. I have been in all the places where I would think you would normally go to get these things, and I have never seen them. But I kid you not, if I'm in an international airport and I see someone walking through in salmon chinos, I know I can go up to them and go, have you ever worked with the British, served in the British Army or been served alongside the British Army? They will go, yes. And I go, guards officer? And 50% of the time they'll go, yes. Coupled with the right kind of shoes and a certain kind of shirt, a cufflink, and I can tell you which regiment they belong to without ever speaking to them. It's quite freaky. There are a few more giggly topics that come up. The 60-second videos. Hi, Tizzy. Colin Cameron, I'm planning a tour down to Lisbon and back in 2 years. Portsmouth to Santander Ferry. Do you have any recommendations of places to visit in Spain and Portugal? Lines of Torres Vedras. I know you're already planning them. The Lines of Torres Vedras, set aside more time than you think, because if you love history, there is a walk where you can walk along it. And it is a really beautiful walk. I have got a friend who does it 3 times a year. It takes a good couple of days with a stop in the middle, but there are places you can stop in the middle, and it's worth it. It's really worth it. George Crab, hello. After World War II, the South American navies bought old gun-based cruisers. What utility did they have from these old ships? Well, again, it's who are you fighting? This is one of the interesting things, and I was almost tempted to print screen this particular comment, because someone said to me, as a commented on one of the videos, oh, if a cruiser isn't also, if a warship isn't all singing and dancing and have all the fancy equipment on it, it's useless as a warship. And the point is that isn't the case. Yes, you always have needed the higher quality, higher capability units. You've always needed the first and second rates. But the majority of the Royal Navy in Napoleonic era was third rate. You've always needed, and look at the frigates, fourth, fifth, sixth rates. Well, the majority of them are fifth rates, and a large number of them are unrated. That is the reality. Okay, yes, you can claim you're always going to be fighting against the elite of the enemy's forces, but in the odds are you're going to be fighting their elite with your elite. The odds are most of the time you're not. A Flower-class corvette is in no way, shape, or form the crown jewels. Yes, they got radar fitted, but it wasn't a fancy radar. It was the basic bare-bones radar they could find at the time. Same with their sonar, for want of a better word, we use sonar here, but ASDEC, of course, in British terminology. It wasn't the best systems that they could build, but it was something they could mass produce quite easily and maintain quite easily, and they were given it, and they did it. And that's what I'm meaning when I talk about these ships being able to build something which is still very useful. It's one of those things of you need to have the funds to be able to produce both the alpha and the beta. You need to be able to produce the core and spend the money on the core of the high quality, highly critical, highly capable assets. But you can spread around them a force of ships which are far more cost efficient, let's say, because quantity does have a quality of its own. But that's the reality. If you are buying a ship which is less capable, you're buying it off the shelf, good quality equipment, but nothing that's going to set the world on fire. You have to be buying them in numbers that makes that worthwhile. And it's the same for the World War II. After World War II, the South American navies, they're buying these old gun-based cruisers. They're still useful for them. Look at the enemies they might be fighting. They have old gun-based cruisers. You might as well have your own. And you can upgrade those cruisers quite easily. You can add in things. So they're cheap. You can keep them going. They'll be robust. And there is an advantage to having something like that if you're a nation which is still building yourself up. Graham Hanna, Doc, has the RN ever had a warship built outside the UK yards? Just need the info to slap a few gnats. Well, in World War One and World War Two, we've had stuff, but outside of the World Wars, we've captured a lot of French equipment, but never in peacetime have we built anything, and never a major unit. Chinos. Well, in answer to the question of chinos, they're these sorts of trousers, which I have to admit I do wear myself. So if I stand back a bit, we call them chinos. God, no, goodness knows what their proper name is, but they are chinos. Wherever I talk to them. Didn't really show them off that well, but yeah, tried. And sometimes the pink Land Rovers cover machine guns and cannons are pretty interesting, to say the least. It gives our baby blue something to be desired. Look, there is the thing that it's one of the jokes I have whenever people try and tell me to stereotype with colours. Almost every colour has been used and has done so many different things. There's no point. And yeah, I myself, I might not have salmon coloured trousers, mainly because I have not ever, to my knowledge, been part of the British Army. And I don't feel that inclination to have such trousers. But I do have a pink shirt, a smart shirt, and a pink tie. Mainly because they are useful for occasions. If you want to wear something that's going to put people off a bit, when they are used to a wall of white and blue, and white and blue, all the shirts are white and blue. I have a black shirt for the similar reason, a couple of them, and a grey shirt as well. But the grey shirt doesn't really work as well. The pink shirt works if I'm trying to put them off in a good and happy way. The black shirts work if I want to make the point of I'm here. These things matter. And it's one of the things you learn as you get older when you're talking about clothing is that the labels matter less than the over impression the ensemble gives. The difference is how close was Texas not worth saving the way because of cost? I think if you wanted to see Texas secede from the United States and start over any other issue, that would be quite. It wouldn't be as quick as if someone had said that Texas was not worth saving because of cost. Secondly, the German military just travels in uniform in public transport because it's free. No, this is in international airports. If you walk into an international airport today and you're watching the departures and arrivals lounge, anyone turns up in salmon chinos, British Army. Definitely British Army. The backgrounds are getting interesting. Yes, we're in a kitchen because this is where I have internet access in this building, or I could find it most quickly. There might be ports elsewhere, but this is where I could plug in and give you a hardline connection. Daniel politics. I guess the fire related injuries Drac could get smoking motion better than the Greek fire accident. He's come very close to that in the past. Very, very close to that. We have to thank Mrs. Drac for that, for protecting him from that one. Hello, Albert. Why are you screaming from a toilet? I'm in a kitchen. Tizzy, had she survived long enough to be there, how do you feel the Ark Royal would have stood up to the kamikaze attack? Well, her flight deck is her strength deck. So, and she is, while she's an armored, it is strong. It's structurally strong. So it would honestly depend on the angle of the aircraft. It wouldn't be as easy for them to take her out as wooden deck, but she wouldn't be quite the sweeper's manual broom scenario that the armored carriers were. Yes, I do agree with Melanie 1640, Dan. You are thinking of Tarn Vedra. I was trying to think because you said Torres Vedra, I was going, I cannot remember it, cannot remember it. It's not that though, and yeah, Melanie 1640 is correct. Tarn Vedra. 7. Hence my R class 74s whilst Hospital for first rate ship a line reference. We need way more 74s again nowadays. It's true. I'm in a kitchen. Not my home kitchen, but I'm in a kitchen. I'm traveling. It's the beginning of September. We have family birthdays and all sorts of things galore in this period, and I basically rack up a couple of thousand miles. In this kitchen, I have a rather large, fluffy research assistant who has decided that he's not going far away from me, no matter how friendly other people are. And I have a large bottle of iron brew, and at some point I will get some food. But so far I haven't got much in. Julius Hunt, what's your opinion on propeller combat planes marked towards small countries in low intensity conflicts against insurgents of AKs and cell phones? Be dreaming of modern Stukas and Zurichs. They actually exist. I think you're looking at the Tucano, Super Tucano. That's a pretty good one already in market, and there's a few others as well. Something like the US just announced the A10 successor, a crop duster. It would work. Third rate ships align a cruiser. Well, that's the interesting thing. It changes once you get into the cruiser period, in sort of that sort of period, because yes, battleships are still your first rates, but some battleships are first rates, some are third rate battleships. And your cruisers, they're divided into your fourth, fifth, and sixth rates. So some of those cruisers are fourth rates, but some are going to be fifth rates. So your light cruisers, your smaller cruisers are probably your fifth rates. And your destroyers are then unrated vessels when it first comes about. Nowadays, we're dealing with a different scenario. I thought chinos are the unofficial uniform of the hospital medical. Then the unofficial uniform of pretty much everyone because they are smart enough that you can get away with them in most scenarios, but comfortable enough and casual enough you can get away with them in most other scenarios. I probably have more pairs of chinos than I do tracksuit bottoms, and I have a lot of pairs of tracksuit bottoms. So I call them slacks, and Yankee shorts tend to pass the knee. So short shorts for English shorts. Slacks, will do. I have heard them called that before as well myself. Anyway, enjoying the videos of the World War Tank class cruise. I heard Sydney's central fire control was wrecked by Enden. What fire control equipment did towns have in 1940? Directors for cruisers came in 1916. The thing is, this is why I didn't get to too much detail of it in the video, because the centralized fire control on her was not really what we would understand as centralized fire control, but it was what they had. They had directed fire control system where theoretically there was a central gunnery officer and they'd be making the computing an average and sending out details, but it wasn't the fire control rangefinder system we would understand it as. It was more of a control position. hmm I'm going to add on timestamps of things. Please, no, Dan, please do not start suggesting to people that they should start wearing pink chinos. So anyway, is it realistic for a World War II era destroyer gun to penetrate a pre-dreadnought's hull? Depends which pre-dreadnought you're talking about and where it's hitting it. There are some pre-dreadnoughts which have almost a preview of all or nothing armor, and therefore yes, but it would be where it hits it. That would be the factor. John Mack, I'm in a war game of the War of the Spanish Succession, and we are going to lay down a new rate of ships, and it came up which methods shall we use, Dutch or English? Your thought? Depends who you are. If you're fighting if you're using a lot of shallow harbors and inshore waters, you probably want to go with the Dutch. If you're going global, you probably want to go with the English because they'll give you better stability and survivability for long range operations. In terms of the ship might take slightly longer getting to places, but when it gets there, the crew and all the supplies will be in slightly better condition, which tends to work out for the best in terms of the actual fighting. Thanks a lot. Just shipbuilding is a bit of a thorny issue at the moment, and some are trying to divert if it makes sense. Let's put it this way: I am, of course, of the extractions I am of, so I have a lot of feelings about those issues. I do try and avoid politics on the channel because we do discuss history. On terms of shipbuilding, I would say this: barring Camel Lairds and Appledore, pretty much all the English yards have been, and the Welsh yards have gone completely. English yards as well have been ignored to focus on providing the necessary succor to the Scottish yards when the Royal Navy was being basically wound down to a smaller size than it should be. The Royal Navy is now being wound, hopefully going to start getting some funding and increases. People have started to realize that, hang on, there are issues. I know there are various articles about, oh, will we have more submarines and replace surface ships with submarines and all that stuff. I'm hoping there'll be more of a general funding increase and that will be certainly more sensible. And I'll certainly be making that case loudly and longly. I think, as current stands are, the vast majority of those ships we built in Scotland. I would be very cautious, though, if I was advising a British government about building all those ships in Scotland. And you think, you aim to stand out like sort of fun. Usually my ties do that for me anyway. That's sure. Stop trying to make pink tunas happen. They're never going to happen. They happen already. There is actually a picture me and Drac have from come back from Canada. We're in. Was it come back from Canada? I think it was with Drac, and I think it was come back from Canada. And I think we were in Gatwick Airport. And there was literally 12 guys walking towards us in a group. They were all slightly marching. And 9 of them were in these pink variations on salmon coloured trousers. And it was just Yeah, we know exactly which branch of the armed services you belong to. Mm-hmm. Hold on, fancy shirt. I have a nice purple dress shirt with a silver vest. Always good to have them. Excellent. Agreed on the shirts. I have a pink shirt for weddings, useful for photos and to get people to talk to you. A president's mission item, if you will. Exactly. Hello, Amazon 16365. 900 black shirts do have their drawbacks. You do run the risk of being mistaken for a waiter. I know that from experience. Couple the black shirt with a very bright, vivid tie. A tie which just screams, I am not a waiter. It works well. Mm-hmm. Big shirts are when you forget to do the white separate. That happens too. David Rogers, love your t-shirt. Yes, it is the dog father. It works well for me. Going on, I use bright pink duct tape with my lights and camera gear because it's the only colour no one steals. They get the salmon chinos in the same shop as the tartan trousers. Also, ex-bankers wear salmon chinos. Oh, good lord, that's true. But the amount of army officers who go on to become bankers as well, that I swear the groups are interchangeable sometimes. I love them both. I have lots of friends who are in both categories. This is all said with good humour, but they do. They are very, very. They all have the same tailor, I swear. I agree on the pink stuff. I do it the same. I buy a lot of my stationery etc. gear, as in my stapler, my uh, tape dispenser, those sort of things are pink, mainly because my sister doesn't nick them. My sister will borrow any other colour. She will never borrow bright pink. Now I say that out loud, she's probably going to hear that on the video when she start borrowing my bright pink equipment. Now she knows the reason I buy the bright pink stuff, but that's why I do it, because she never borrows the bright pink stuff. As to Shaw, I reserve the right not to comment on that one. You look like you're good afternoon, Rosa. Good luck. You look like you're working a drive-through. No, this is an actual person's kitchen. Well, accommodations kitchen. That's fine. But September birthday, so from all those Xmas New Year's festivals, I am not commenting, Manly. Not commenting on that one. The background, Night Origins, the background and location may change, but the brew and the fluffy research assistant will always remain. It's true. Although the fluffy research assistant at this point is asleep. He's had a hard day. Oh, Dan, I'm not repeating that one. Night Origins, as I understand it, the Sea Vixen is your favourite Fleet Air Arm aircraft. Is there anything you'd fix or amend on them? They had a depressingly short service life, but the tech progression was interesting then. Um, Honestly, if they could have been given a slightly bigger, actually given the ability to carry slightly more weapons and have a slightly longer range, they'd have probably lasted around a lot longer. Appledore in Devon. It's a shipyard. 1640. Animal 6, how would you rate British shipbuilding in World War II versus World War One? World War Two was World War Two was certainly better, but it was built up in terms of World War One. There were more yards, and it was able to compensate for issues with quantity. World War Two, they were able to drive at far higher quality and still get enough quantity out. And that was mostly due to the studies done by the naval constructors and the Office of the Third Sea Lord in the interwar years, and as the preps implemented in the mid to late 1930s. RG, Clarke, I've been reading Norman Freeman's illustrated book on US battleships. Cool. And what's great, how would you rate the design F for North Carolina class? I think it's hilarious. Every Navy deserves to have at least one design F. You're allowed to have one random design. You're allowed to have one design moment which just screams everything that is you, but also everything that is wrong with your ship design process. The Royal Navy has it. The Royal Navy has a few of them. The Royal Navy, I could probably do a video about them at some point. Probably will do. If next year turns into a design technology year, next year we'll get that video. Mm-hmm. I'm getting that. I get thinking that medium drones carrying loitering ammo or kamikaze drones are the way because they're easier to serve, cheaper or per flight hour. With Stinger or Eglid shows up, you do not lose the pilot. Yes and no. There is one problem with the drone. There is one problem with the drones, and that is you are dependent upon satellites. You are dependent upon lots of things which are remote operation is great. However, a pilot allows for very localized command and control, and a human at the practical point in decision making loop who's got a full view, got quite a big view of what's going on. Um, it basically it comes back to the command and control and the rules of engagement scenario as to why sometimes it's probably better to go with the risking the human life than it is to go with just running the machines. Grant, that's what I hoped you'd say, as it was near enough the point I made. I thought it would be. And thanks. I always thought that the USS Canberra was named for the Australian city, but saw a reference yesterday to the USN named for HMAS Cruiser lost in the Battle of South Island. True. And in return, the Australians allow the Americans to name ask MacArthur to name a ship about after a ship as well, and he called it HMAS Bataan, which is why there was a USS Bataan, a carrier, an HMAS Bataan, a destroyer, and fighting alongside each other at several points. Don Giovanni, what would people who came up with a through deck cruiser think if you told them that someone would build a 27,000 ton destroyer? They'd ask you what they were building it for. And honestly, I've been looking at some fairly big ships recently. And honestly, if I go back to the through deck cruisers, I think the Invincible class needed to be about 5 to 6,000 tons greater in displacement. With that displacement mainly going to give them slightly longer length and preferably deck edge lifts. Um, how does the Flocky research assistant cope with travel? He enjoys it mostly. As a rule, when he's traveling, he's got most of the back seat to himself. Sometimes my mum will if my mum's driving and they'll be both in the back of her car, and then they're sharing a back seat. That's slightly more interesting. but usually I have only one with me in my car. The fluffy research assistant likes to go in the back seat and have the whole back seat to stare around and stare out all the windows. The fluffy research assistant, well, technically he's supposed to go in the back seat, but he actually likes to sit in the front passenger seat if he can. That's his favourite spot, the front passenger seat, where he can spend his time basically going, nudge, nudge, pat me, nudge, nudge, pat me, and occasionally look out the window and go, ooh, humans, could I nudge them for them to pat me? No. So no, before I knew much about the Naval history, I thought the destroyers were the biggest ships, even World War II. Yeah, don't worry, that's what I call the Star Wars effect on ship design. And Dan Freeman then points that out as well. Senior Richards, talking about pink. Was there a pink US sub World War II, or are they really putting my leg? I think there really was. I seem to remember looking it up because of the movie I saw years ago about the pink submarine and finding out there really was one which was painted pink at one point. But I think that's because they ran out of it was because of they needed paint to anti-fouling paint, etc., and the paint they need to put on the hull to protect it. And they had some white paint and they had some red paint, but they didn't have enough white paint or enough red paint to paint the whole hull, so they mixed the two together. No. Okay, Renana and Pulse survived Singapore. Renown's not at Singapore. Repulse is though. Okay, but I'm presuming this is some sort of different scenario. End up going to Australia. Does that mean they would have been available to help out with Operation Watchtower? And my God, MacArthur let loose some more warships. Let's put it this way: if British capital ships survive in any way, shape, or form after 4C, then a British admiral would have been found to command them. If a British admiral is in charge of them, then ABDA command probably doesn't go to Dorman, it probably goes to that admiral. How that changes things and how the command and control system such an admiral and such a ship could bring in would affect things is completely, we won't know. But it would have changed stuff. Didn't the Sea Vixen suffer from coming ahead of the Buccaneer Blackburn's yin to yang at a Blackburn Blackburn? I think the Sea Vixen and the Buccaneer were actually good partners at one point, but the Sea Vixen's replaced by the Phantom. Professor, does the RN Dr. Clarke, does the RN have its own contractor? Oh. That woke you up, didn't it? Now you've gone back to sleep. All right. So many. Let's see. HMS Vanguard, the World War One dreadnought, was kind of interesting. There are a few cruisers which certainly had a habit of thinking that they saw enemies. But as a rule, British ships were usually quite well drilled and practiced, and that means these things are rare. But there are certainly some issues in World War II with merchant ships as part of convoys and getting them used to the convoy sailing. Definitely, yeah. Prince of Wales not around. Sorry, I'm looking at a pick of renown. Hence the conclusion. If those ships both survive, then Tom Phillips survives. If Tom Phillips survives, he's in charge of ABDA command, and you get a very different scenario going on because, in the nicest way, MacArthur is not a 5-star general at that point, but Phillips is a full Royal Navy admiral, and so could possibly have ended up being. It would be an interesting scenario to see what would happen. Sure, mate. You can send as many shells or unmanned systems as you want to, but eventually you'll need to send a human for some reason or another. Yep. Game on rehuman loop. Drones have it, and I was specific for low threat environments with AKs, cell phones, and occasional tow to ISIS. The trouble is, low threat environments don't stay low. None of these. Someone refresh my memory. Through deck cruiser, invincible class. Hello, KD85. You've been a member for 8 months. Thank you for the support. Um, Bets on which of the still missing wrecks will be found next, or would you? Which would you like to be found next? I'm hoping they start getting the rest of the destroyers from the various battle. Look, I would like to know where the destroyers went down in some of the Pacific battles, mainly because it might give us more of an idea of what they're actually doing. We have a theorized based on accounts, etc., and reports, but you always have to remember the people who are reporting these only report their image of what they know. And if you can collect all those images and you also can find a wreck and you can work out what was the damage that was done to it by the actual combat and what was damage done to it by the wrecking and where it's ended up, that gives you another point of data to add into the whole mix to be able to better synthesize the data you've already got. Basically, after the 1967 white paper, where we no longer were going to be east of Suez, the decision about east of Suez and the carriers, etc., the Royal Navy wasn't allowed carriers, but they were allowed anti-submarine warfare cruisers. And those ASW cruisers turned into through-deck cruisers and eventually turned into aircraft carriers. It's one of those interesting scenarios where there's a whole debate as to how long they were called through deck cruisers for, whether they were actually called through deck cruisers, whether it's an apocryphal tale, all those things come up. Myself, it was true. I know that because I know one on naval architect and knew one of the naval architects who was involved in the project. In fact, I've known four naval architects who were involved in the project. And they all called them that, and all said they were called that for a while. So that's my basis of it. IO2. What if instead of the Invincibles, the RNZ ordered an updated HMS Hermes as either a through deck cruiser or a budget commando carrier? If they ordered an updated version of, well, basically, if they built a light fleet carrier, an up to date modern light fleet carrier design, that would have been an interesting option to go with. It still required more crew. But to an extent, that's what I'm talking about when you take the Invincibles and you add about 8,000 tons more onto them. Archie, Dr. Clarke, what if the Kaiser and friends in the Anglo-German arms race decided to put in the effort not just in hulls and tech? What would change? Well, what the Germans concentrated on hulls because they had the infrastructure to do that. They didn't have the infrastructure to do that and the tech at the same time, which is why the tech push doesn't come from the Germans. Tech push comes from the Italians and the Americans, who are upgrading their ships, and the British then upgrade theirs to match them, and then the Germans then build to match the British. And the Germans are building numbers, so the British have to build numbers to match the Germans, and the other nations are building technology, so the British have to build technology to build it. So basically, Britain's in almost a three-rail race. Tech race, which is a cheap race as far as they're concerned, versus America and Italy. They can afford that with their industrial complex and their, all the facilities they have. that the numbers race versus Germany adds another layer of cost onto it, which is quite dramatic because the Germans are building to match the technological capabilities of the British. The British have to build to match the technology capabilities of the most technologically capable of a navy opponent out there, which is not the Germans. It's the Italians, it's the Americans. So the British are caught in a two-way vice, which is the whole layer of the Anglo-German naval race that I got into in terms of the Dreadnought series I did about a year. What do you think Yars like, Graham Hanna? When do you think Yars like Camel will start getting expanded? I know you think about the Infrastructure Act. I'm hoping not too long, but I'm also. Let's put it this way. In 2010, we had a coalition government in the United Kingdom. And a gentleman called Nick Clegg, who was Deputy Prime Minister at the time, made the statement that we shouldn't invest in nuclear stations because they wouldn't be online till 2022, 2023, and that meant there'd be no help to our environmental needs. The thing was, if we'd invested in those stations then and pushed them up then frankly we wouldn't be being as affected as we are by the increase in gas costs at the moment it's caused by the issues over, well, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Everything has a consequence, long term, short term, and medium term. And they always have second and third order effects. And you can make the most reasonable decision back in 2010, and then you can find it has real long term consequences for you. Those words in 2010, he probably didn't think too much about it. It made sense at the time. We were in an economic crisis at the time, and they were trying to fix it. So he probably thought it was sensible. Now, looking back, that decision looks very short sighted. But if you'd asked someone in 2019 whether it looked short sighted or 2020 it looked short sighted, they'd probably said, no, it's perfectly sensible. And that's the trouble with hindsight. We can cross examine a lot of things, but often the best time to start investing in infrastructure was 10 years ago. So basically, invest today. Directions. I sadly don't know of one. I know of one for Bucks and Ark Royal, but not the Phantom, sadly. By the way, look up the channel Super 8 Restoration. He's an ex-Ark serviceman, has a lot of footage of Phantoms operating on deck. Cool. So speaking of red paint, why is the underwater line of so many ships red? Because that's pretty much the cheapest color of anti-fouling paint. Sure. I was having an argument about the use of King George V's and ours in the Pacific. First, I was arguing with that they were useless and that the cruisers and the destroyers could do the job of a carrier, escort better. But they don't have the free top weight for upgrades and freedom levels of AA. Okay. Well, it's looking at what you want. If you just want your cruisers and destroyers to do one thing, they're going to be good at it. You add on more options for the requirements for them, they're going to get more complicated at those times. Basically, small ships have less ability to upgrade before you have to start taking stuff off and changing stuff around. Look at the number of destroyers which had to lose torpedo launchers to take on increased AA element. It's what happens. The thing about the battleships is because of the lack of fast fleet oilers and the scenarios that develop in the Pacific War, they don't get as much attention or experience as they might deserve. It's one of the interesting things, though, is when you start having discussions with people and you start going, well, battleships did have quite big battles in World War II. There were battles between battleships. And often some of my audience will look at me and go, oh, what are you talking about? This didn't happen in the Pacific. And I go, no, but it happened in Mediterranean, it happened in the North Atlantic, it happened in the North Sea. It happened several times. It didn't happen in the Pacific because both sides held back their battle fleets. The Americans, because of lack of fast fleet oilers, so they could pick whether to deploy their carriers and cruisers and destroyers, which use less fuel, and the Japanese because they were holding them back for, well, either the Kantai-Kessen doctrine or until they could make the most use of them. That, or they're due to their own lack of fuel. So there are lots of reasons why there isn't a big battleship fight in the Pacific. But there are some fights still. It's copper oxide in there. It's copper oxide which is used in their red and anti-fouling paint, which is one of the reasons why it's red and also why it's cheaper. And instructions. Okay, Dr. Clarke. No one's ever answered this to my satisfaction. What makes the Scimitar such a deadly aircraft for their pilots? What are their strengths and weaknesses as strike aircraft? Well, how do I put this politely? Supermarine Scimitar. So, basically, someone's trying to build a jet based off the same ideas that built some of Supermarine's best piston propeller fighters. Um, the trouble was, if you consider design, um, there was no ability to eject through the canopy. And if I give you this example, in 1958, after it's actually listed on Wikipedia, I found the results. I tried to find them elsewhere, and this one came up here. It came up there. After a perfect landing on newly recommissioned HMS Victorious, and in full view of the press, one of the arrestor wires broke, causing Commander John Russell's Scimitar, serial XD-240, to fall into the sea. With no means of ejecting through the canopy, and despite the best efforts of the crew of the Western Whirling Plain Guard helicopter to rescue him, Russell drowned as his scimitar sank to the bottom. The incident was later, of course, broadcast by British Pathé News, and when the aircraft was recovered, it was found that Russell had managed to open the canopy after the aircraft sank, but had been prevented from successfully escaping due to being tethered by the ejector seat leg straps and a dinghy lanyard. It was just not well designed for pilot survivability. And they also had competition because they had they had the Sea Venom, and then the Vixen come into service, and then eventually the Blackburn Buccaneer. So honestly, it wasn't needed. It was succeeded by far better aircraft. Declan 5, that would be an interesting one. Admiral King would have done his exploding boiler impression. MacArthur's will would have met Phillips' won't. It would have been an interesting discussion. I don't think Phillips had had a good impression of MacArthur from when he met him, or rather, hadn't failed to meet him in the Philippines while meeting up with the various naval commanders out there. I'm 665. Given what we know of the new Chinese aircraft carrier, what are your thoughts on its versus its contemporaries from USN Iron? I think it's a good aircraft carrier. It'll be interesting to see how they develop it. It certainly looks like it has the bones of a decent design, but we'll see because the proof will be in the pudding. The fact is, the Chinese have followed a very iterative process, a very conservatively iterative process to develop their naval aviation. One of the interesting conversations with people I've had recently is people going, well, they haven't started serial production yet. They're not building any more carriers, and they're not going to, because number three is another test bed. I think they have started number four, but number four is going to have a nuclear reactor, a nuclear power plant, and number four will probably be the basis for the eventual class of carriers which they'll build. But they're going to take their time to check things out before they actually do it. It's going to be slow because they can afford to be slow at the moment. Liam Proctor, hello Liam. What's your opinion on all the recent ship classes built in Scotland? Batch 2, QEs, 45s. Any thoughts on the new 2631? They're all decent ships. I like the Queen Elizabeth. I prefer to have three of them, and I prefer them to be slightly longer, and us to have another dry dock to be used for them. But other than that, they're very good aircraft carriers, and for what Britain needs them to do. And that's the thing. When people start talking about these things, aircraft carriers, ships, etc., I always go, well, what are you building them for? Who are they for? If you compare what is the best fit for the Americans and there to what the British are building, the British is always going to be second rate because it's not going to fit with what the Americans need from a carrier. But does it fit with does what the Americans build with a carrier fit what the British need with a carrier? Not necessarily. So there's the differential going on. Type 45 is good. It should have been fitted with Mark 41 VLS from the beginning. It should have been fitted with probably some form of Seawolf missile VLS as well from the beginning in another position, so it could concentrate on longer range anti-air missiles for its PAMS Asta loadout. But no, they're a fairly decent design. Again, we needed to get more. Batch 2 rivers are fine. They're chugging around the world doing what they need to do. And the Type 26, I have yet to visit, but it looks good to me. Type 31, from all the stuff I've read, and again, I'd like to visit, but I haven't seen anything that sort of detracts from it yet. It looks like it's a good idea. It's certainly based off a good idea. The Ivor Hoodfolk class is some of my favourite ships in service. Douglas, the PLA's carriers are a floating death trap. Apparently, they've lost a lot of MiGs in lake landings. Well, you're training a fleet air arm from the beginning with some of the most difficult to learn on aircraft in the world. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. MiGs are not always the most fun to try and learn to land on aircraft carriers with. They don't do well. They don't tend to do well at low and slow maneuverings. They did look at the new light fleet carrier designs in the 50s with dimensions over Colossus Class Y. Was it a case of newer, more reliable machinery? Yeah, pretty much. Newer, more reliable machinery and less weight, less cost. Plus, continuation of a design which is already in service, and therefore you already have de-risked some of the problems of it. But guys, did Australia have a large enough dry dock to work on Renown and King George class warships? I think they did, and if they hadn't, one could have been brought in. Wow, what kind of weather are you having? It looks really freaking windy outside. Yeah, it's pretty windy down here. I'm currently close to the Atlantic, so that wouldn't surprise me. It's getting pretty windy outside. In fact, if I have my way, the next Sundays might be done from a view of the Atlantic. Depends where I am. So, Karen, would you say that the Invincible class were a match to the Pensacola class in that they were a cruiser that changed its designation through politics? Mm, to an extent, but I would say the Invincibles are more taken over by the reality of the world than the Pensacolas are. Pensacolas are basically they are changed by politics, whereas the Invincibles are changed by the politics changing the world around them. On infrastructure, I'm reminded of the probably apocryphal story about military leader here and planting the trees to shelter his men, taking years and saying yes, so we should start right away. Napoleon. Actually, that story looks like it could well be true, and it wouldn't surprise me. That was one good thing about Napoleon. He always did plan. It's kind of like lots of people have talked about ruling for 1,000 years. Napoleon was one of the few people who actually seemed to think he actually would do and plan for it. And do you understand, if you were Minister of Defense of a small country shopping for fighters on a budget, would you buy new smaller jets from Turkey or China or hand me down F-16s? Hmm. Um, if I was a country shopping for them, I'd go for Gripens. I'm sorry, I'd go a different way. I wouldn't go for Turkey. I wouldn't go for China. I would go to Sweden and buy Gripens rather than buying F-16s because Gripens are better than the F-16 options they have available. And I would consider Sweden a more reliable ally to invest with than either Turkey or China. That's like, I point as much criticisms you have for bridge design in sci-fi. Merchant warships today have bridges that are high exposed and have windows. Yeah, don't get me started. But usually that's because the bridges in sci-fi often combine the role of the command and control center, whereas on warships these days they tend to have a command center or a CIC, command information center, somewhere down below. So they have some survivability. They have the battle bridge. Sure, Mike. One thing I constantly stress to people is that it wasn't the battleships were bad during World War II. It's just it turned out that aircraft carriers were more flexible, pretty much. Archie, Dr. Clarke, what if Patton had been a naval officer? He would have been a destroyer man. There is no way on earth Patton would have been anything other than leading destroyers. He would be leading huge forces of destroyers, but he would be leading destroyers. John Luke, with the issues for the IJN and USN battle fleets in the Pacific, could the Royal Navy have mustered the battle fleet and support units to engage with prejudice at the earliest opportunity? Who would go? Um, Honestly, the Royal Navy did muster them as early as they could. You have to remember, the Royal Navy has to retain battleships in the Mediterranean and in the European waters to counter the German and the Italian ships. So that's where the Royal Navy is. When people ask me why the Royal Navy doesn't turn up in the Pacific, I go, well, why does the US Navy not turn up in the Mediterranean? And they look at me sort of with funny eyes and they go, but we do. I know you do. But there's also small ships of the Royal Navy turning up in the Far East. And the Australians are out there, and that's part of the British Commonwealth naval commitment. And the British have the Indian Ocean Fleet as well. So the thing is, the scenario is far more complicated than the often shouted out headlines say. And the ships that appear are appearing where they need to be. There's a judgment call made of where do you need battleships, where do you need this, where do you need that. But as soon as they do appear, they do turn up, and then they have the job of supporting them, and that's the British Pacific Fleet. And the entire story of that is one long logistics chain. Our president, Dr. Clarke, was watching Mysteries Deep. Never thought about the Amber Room being on the bottom of the Baltic. It wouldn't surprise me. It's definitely a strong option. Ian Proctor, what's your choice in the recent ship classes? What's your opinion on the recent ship classes? I think I answered that one. Astral, honestly, even in space, I suspect that we will have a still have windows because humans like being looking out when maneuvering. It's like turning off music when parking or finding places. Oh, yes, you're probably right, but surely we can make do with a view screen. Make it look like a window. It doesn't actually have to be a window. Hi, Frank Spadaro. If BAE designed a Blackburn 2 as a new carrier aircraft, what would it be? It could well be their new design for a loyal wingman. Dan Freeman, what would you call the third Queen Elizabeth class if we were going to have a third? Would we change the name of the second so that the second would be Ark Royal? No, the third would be Ark Royal. It's Ark Royal. That's what you go with. Dan Freeman, so a dozen Type 45s, a third Queen Elizabeth class carrier. How many more other escorts like 206 and 31? We can work that out from the basic thing. If you're building a dozen Type 45s, how many escort groups are you working around? If you're working around 4 escort groups, then it's batched to 3 Type 45s and probably matching out Type 26s. If you're working around 6 escort groups of 2 of Type 45s, you probably want 3 Type 26s per one. So that would take you up to 18. Then you'd also need the ones for doing things like the support of the strategic deterrent and those other routers. So probably you end up with a need of about 21, 24. And you probably want 12 to 18 Type 31s. Under that scenario. Dr. Clarke, are they sending one of the Queen Elizabeths to the continent for dry dock? Why would you build a warship you couldn't dry dock domestically? Because people decided that the theory worked. In theory, they could do it with one dry dock, and potentially the other dry docks would fill in because they'd be available because they're all commercial dry docks, so you could always hire one. The trouble was, what happens if all those commercial dry docks happen to be in use and the dry dock you have is already doing work? Oh, sugar, you're then frigated. Dizzy, was there a plan for an amphibious landing of occupied Belgium World War I to turn the German lines? Yes. Or would it have been too easy for the Germans to counter and push them back in the sea? Nope, there was actual plans, and they were planning on doing it, but the German line collapsed before they got around to doing it. But that was what the British were planning in, and that would have been the amphibious operations which would have ended the war. For example, let's see. It seems battles North Cape and Cape St George are both end caps at month apart, two different naval campaigns that also both show a series new sense of tech and tax for outside the Axis. What more could you say about how strangely similar these two battles are, despite their unique set differences? Both showed a way the navies have changed. One interesting thing you realize in World War II is the Allied navies evolve a lot more in the war than the Axis navies. Not sure what it is, but the Axis navies start off the war with very, very good tech, mostly. They don't have all the tech, but they have some very good tech. but they don't evolve as much once war begins, mainly because they don't have the infrastructure to evolve as war goes on. Whereas whole new classes, and when I'm saying whole new classes, large numbers of ships are ordered, brought in service, new technologies, new weapon systems, even by the British who are being bombed, let alone by the Americans. So yeah, it's an interesting world they're in, and this is the problem in some respects for the Axis forces because they built their navies to fight and counter one set of capabilities amongst the Allies, and now they're dealing with something which is very different. Um, Very cool, Stafford. IO2. Hello, IO2. If you had 48 hours to improve AA of Force Z before it set out with whatever you can scrounge up in Singapore, what would you do? Confirm and set up protocols for working with the fighters ashore. So set up, make. I would actually go physically visit them, arrange details, and invite them onto the ships, invite them to meet the crews, and therefore, the moment I had problems, the moment I thought I spotted, I could send a message and go, beep, please come help us. Because that might not save Prince of Wales, but I would probably save Repulse. And then that has an impact. It might even save a lot of the survivors from the people from Prince of Wales. Something here. A US carrier battle group, Ford class, comes up to Nelson's fleet, chasing the French fleet out the Atlantic before Trafalgar. What do you think might happen? A lot of shock. As in Nelson's fleet from the Ford Battle Trafalgar from an ultimate dungeon gets sent forward to 2022. That's going to be a lot of explaining going on. There could also be some interesting decisions vis-a-vis potential boarding actions, because yeah, no, the Americans weren't fighting us at that point, so we'll be okay. But yeah, that would be in a very confusing scenario, and I think the Royal Navy would be sent for immediately. Test DJ. Nighttime Americans. Dr. Clarke, if you're on the south coast or around the Thames estuary between now and October, Paddle Steam Waverley is making a tour of those areas. Just thought to mention it on the off chance. I have heard something, and I am going to be trying something if I can. Frank's Model, Dodgy, what changes for North Cape if the destroyers stay with Scharnhorst? You get a destroyer battle. It would not be fun, but the British were bringing quite a lot of destroyers with them. And they even had some tribals sitting back with the convoy, who they call, but remember they did have HMS Savage with them. And she was the prototype for the battle class in that she had the twin 4-5 forward and the single 4-5s aft, so she'd been pretty darn scary. Would have done a lot of damage to them. And merchant. I'd probably buy the French Rafale, nighttime merchants. Yeah. I can understand why, but I would prefer to go for the Swedish option than the French. The Swedish tend to be more supportive than the French, and the French tend to be a bit mercurial sometimes. They're very good allies, but the French can be very mercurial about industrial support. Um, what would Britain do if Nelson's fleet came into Portsmouth Harbour now? Probably wonder what was going on. They certainly would wonder a lot about what was going on. It would be an interesting scenario if Nelson's fleet turned up in Portsmouth Harbour. I think most likely, knowing the British, uh, the BBC would be dispatched, followed by ITV. Channel 4 would do a documentary, which would be focusing on the plight of the lower decks. The BBC would want to interview all the senior officers. ITV would be doing a discussion on who pays for what. Jeremy Kyle would probably be talking about should we start war again with the French, as obviously all these people now with us are now in favour of war against the French. And considering the actual population demographics of that fleet, I'm not quite sure how GB News would react. But it would certainly be interesting. Sorry, that did get a little bit political, but I just couldn't resist the joke. I too. I would probably look pretty hard at the South Korean FA-50 or their upcoming F-21. Those seem good value for their cost. They are good value for their cost, but the Gripen is the one I would go for at the moment, especially as this is interesting. This is the question which often gets forgotten: is they have experience of supplying it to foreign allies. And for those who aren't quite sure, someone has just turned on the kettle over there. So that's a noise you can hear like a jet going off, taking off. Da-da-da-da. No, I wouldn't send anyone to get the Typhoon. I wouldn't. The Typhoon is almost as much a drama queen to support as the F-35. Both are very, very good aircraft. Both require a lot of very skilled maintainers. And that's something a small nation has to think about. Most of the bigger nations, which are the nations which have taken on those aircraft, already have deep wells of experienced maintainers to call upon, so they can do it. They can do it, and they have the infrastructure already in place in terms of the airfields, etc. If you're a small nation, you're building up an air force, especially if you're going for your first jet fighter. The Gripen is a very good aircraft to go with. So you like the bridge on a new Battlestar Galactica to the one from the 70s? It certainly makes a bit more sense to me. Carlos Regripe, and I agree with the caveat that since Sloan heads to be a NATO member and depends on some US licenses, there is a political dimension which, frankly, might not be suit someone. Day of politics. Actually, if the fleet from Trafalgar arrives in a time without the TOT, the RN would be very well advised to send for the Royal Marines very urgently. I predict a riot. No, we'd probably find them something. And besides, British ships are not yet dry. They still have alcohol available. They just don't give it out as part of the daily rations. Bilge Party and Paul Bestwick, email. Did anyone ask when to expect Bilge Pumps 102? It'll be coming out tomorrow, actually. This is on me. I uploaded it. On not last night, the night before, and I set it to go out today. I thought I did, and then I put it in. I put it in the wrong day, so I set it to go live on the 5th rather than the 4th. No, I said to go. I thought I was aiming to try and get it to go live on the 3rd, and I set it for the 5th instead. So that's on me. That was me. Okay, and I just didn't realize. But it'll go live at 12 UK time, 7 a.m. US time East Coast, I think it is. Tomorrow. Hang on, Dr. C, do you think there are a lot of left German bunkers and equipment across Norway? Maybe anything from when they're based on much from their forces could be something, but I do know there's a lot of it down in the Isle of Jersey. I do know Jersey has an entire cavern which they just put the stuff in and sealed up. So there's an entire cave system which the Germans were digging out these huge underground bunkers in Jersey because they planned to be there for decades, hundreds of years. And there's one they just loaded the stuff in and they just sealed it up because they just wanted to get rid of it. So there's all sorts of equipment in there. Glenstrait, use holograms and screens to make make the bridge appear to be suspended in open space. Sounds good. So, Short, do you think it would make a big difference into the Indian Ocean raid if Andrew Cunningham had been in charge rather than Somerville? Not really. I think Somerville by this time is trying his best and is definitely one of the better ones, but he gets a bit unlucky. I think what would have made a difference again, if you want to make a difference in this scenario, you either have to go for a completely left field and pick someone from much lower down the ranks. Because the Royal Navy have lost so many senior officers, there aren't that many good ones around to go out there. So you have to go down and get. If you want to change the Indian Ocean raid, you've got to pick someone pretty darn aggressive, which basically means you've got Philip Vian. But he hasn't yet got the experience. He's just about a rear admiral at this point. He's not going to be senior enough to be put out there. Somerville's your only option, and he's doing it very well. Again, you're not going to move Cunningham from where he is. John Cunningham's always an option. Strange enough, I would say Harwood actually could have been a better option. Because Harwood is terrible at managing the politics of a senior command, but he's actually good at fleet command. So he could have actually been quite good in the ocean theatre. I think the trouble is for Somerville is he's sent out completely on his own, pretty much. He has no senior officers for him to work with and liaise with, so he can't be a theatre commander with a fleet commander. He has to be everything himself. He has just enough staff, and he's the big staff man. He likes to have a decent staff and put them together. And he's given not enough ships. If he'd had, again, it's one of those things of you go back and you go to Churchill's decision in 1939 and the carrier procurement decision. Because again, if you'd had 3 or 4 more carriers in service by that point, which you would have done, even if you'd lost those carriers, you'd still have 3 or 4, but you might not have lost the carriers you did if you'd had those carriers in service, because things might have changed vis-a-vis Toronto, vis-a-vis therefore Crete, with long-term consequences for what Ark Royal's operations are and all those things. So those might have changed things. You have a different scenario. Operations in the Indian Ocean raid changes dramatically once you add in another third carrier, let alone a fourth carrier onto the British side. And the option, of course, is if they get their night attack right. If they got their night attack right, if they had found the enemy fleet and launched their attack at night, the Japanese could have had a very upsetting experience in the ocean. It all depends on how much damage the British manage to do at night before the Japanese can start waking up during the day. That's going to be the thing. It's going to be a race against time before dawn. British do enough damage during the night, then the Japanese in the daytime can't catch up and are going to be whacked. Japanese manage to avoid and only get minimal damage at night, then next day, if they decide to go hunting the British could be in a lot of trouble. Again, it'll depend on how well the British run the fighter control system. Then points. If a load of Nelson era iron sailors turn up and find out They won't get a roughly triple measure of overproof rum every day. They are going to be very displeased. Yeah, but they get other things instead, so they might actually not be that displeased. There are trade offs. The more problem you're going to have to do is deal with a whole adult literacy program. And look, I heard the Prince of Wales had to return to port for propulsion problems. Do you know what this problem is in? It's to do with the propeller and propeller shaft. That's what I heard. Propeller more than propeller shaft, I think. Thank you, VCH. Hello. Uh, it's not a large loo, it's a kitchen. Someone is now trying to attempt the floppy research assistant with food, and he's sort of deciding, should I go for it or should I not? Maybe I'll have something. Maybe. In October 1937, via some circumstance, the US Air Forces created and given F 15s, F 22s, B 1s, and B 52s the infrastructure, supply, and ability to produce them in World War II quantity. What changes? Well, World War II probably ends in about, let's see, how long would it take for B 52s to take out the entirety of Japanese infrastructure? Um, if you have them in World War II quantities, uh, let's say they replace the B 29s, yeah, there would be no Japan left within about a week. Would Japan surrender? Probably not. You probably still have to go and do an invasion. But when you did do an invasion, you'd be fighting a country which would be armed mostly with bows and arrows, which are very deadly, but should probably not cause too much damage compared to machine guns, especially if you can give your people some decent chainmail. Anyway, just look at the number of types and ships, types and numbers of amphibious ships and craft and the navies. None of these were in existence in 1939. Yeah, most of them weren't. There were quite a few which were. Alistair, if you had 48 hours to save 4C, what would you do? Dr. Clarke. Proper staff work. Yeah, because that was what you could do in 48 hours and it would work. Oh, God, I'm boring, but I'm accurate. Dr. Clarke, did Orange destroyers ever try to pick a gunfight with a capital ship, and could the guns penetrate the deck or beat it at a ballistic range? Well, I've told you about the tribal class destroyer HMS Somali, which decided to fire her guns. Was picking a gunfight with an Italian battleship and was even firing baked bean cans at one point. I don't think at any point could she penetrate the belt or deck really at any range. Maybe if she was standing right next to it, I don't know. But no one ever did that test. Yeah, she did cover them with baked beans and the tomato sauce baked beans come in. So that probably was quite offensive to the Italian ship. Let's see. Can you give me some more information and opinion on the Despero convoy? I said, could you ask me that question when I'm at home? So when you see me in a brew ship, in the brew shack, with orange walls around me, not very nice yellow tile, but still yellow tile, then I can really answer that question. Unfortunately, the only books I have with me at the moment are ships of the Royal Navy, warships of the submarines of World War Two, the Troubles, Battles, and Darings, which doesn't have the Aspera convoy because there was no troubles involved, and the Camouflage book. Turkey. So it'd be basically what I could find on Wikipedia at the moment, which isn't really what I would like to repeat. How, Dr. Clarke, how goes your writing projects? I am a functioning insomniac as ever. Same here. What is GB News? I picked out that they are extreme, right or left? They're not really extreme. GB News are not extreme. They think they're the British equivalent of Fox News, but they are not quite. I find them interesting. It depends on the program, and I watch some of those. Some of their sections are definitely more about entertainment than news. They're more entertainment value, and some of the sections are good. So, but there again, that's like most modern news these days. Drac has this statement, and it sort of makes in a simple version what my grandfather always said. Whenever you want to evaluate a news source, find a time when they've talked about something you know in depth. Consider how accurate they are. If they're not that accurate, depending on assess their quality based on the accuracy there, and then that tells you whether you can trust them on other things. Because if they're not accurate in your area of expertise, the odds are they're not going to be accurate in your areas where you're not an expert. Which means go find someone who is an expert. And that means someone who has actual qualifications and practical experience in the thing you're talking about, in the thing you're interested in. So if you want to find out information about economics, I would always say go and actually find an economist. I know a very good one. He's called Alan Sykes. He's written several books. It's worthwhile reading his stuff because actually it makes a lot more sense than a lot of the stuff you see on the various news shows about economics because he's actually done the research and he's actually lived it and studied it his whole life. He has a protege, and her book hasn't yet been published, but when it is, I'll start recommending her as well and her book. So no dry dock. It wasn't actually while he was in my garden he got exposed. It was while he was working on his own sailors video. When I was in garden, I tried to keep him safe. Frank Dossi, you asked us some forgotten battles. Would you consider Valor Gulf, Horano, and Valor de Valor DD actions as a good set to cover? Yeah. As sure, you would quarantine the entire fleet, all several thousand of them, due to their smallpox infections, and almost certainly nastier syphilis infections. Oh, it'll be fun. Right, Dr. C, what is the naval decision the leader of each axis of power in Russia made that you agree with or respect? Building the Scharnhorst class, actually building the Graf Zeppelin. I like the cruisers the Italians are building. Pardon me. You see, I actually to an extent agree with building Yamato Musashi. The more I think about it, the more I agree with it. The more I disagree with the idea of keeping it secret, though. Because if you're going to be building these big statements of power, get your value out of them. half the value of a capital ship is in the other person's perception of it. If they don't know about it, they can't perceive it. If they can't perceive it, you get in no value. You have immediately stripped it of its value. That's the whole point about a capital ship. Let's put it this way. There are things a navy builds, like an army has or an air force have, which are not so much, well, their capability in warfighting is great, but they are about, to be honest, they're the people who they're for the people who take rulers in the bathrooms brigade. They are literally that. They are you saying this is how big and powerful I am. So therefore, you need to sing their praises. It's tanks at the moment for armies. Should be artillery, but it's tanks. For air forces these days, it's their fighters. Again, you're not quite sure whether it should be their fighters, but it is their fighters. For navies, it's always been the first rate capital ships. They're the big, mean guys. Now, these days, that encompasses things like nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. But in the World War II period, that was your battleships. So if you have a stonking great big one, if you have a mighty ship which is going to have armor which is that thick and is going to have these massive great big guns, then you shout about it. You put pictures of their shells standing on their end next to a guy, and you pick the smallest guy you can find, call them an average sized person, and you have the photo go out to everyone, and you go, look how big they are. And you scare the bejesus out of people with them. That's what a capital ship is for. Let's see. What is Frank Spada? Let's see. What is the naval decision? The leader of each answer that one. Then parts the crew would also be naive to influenza, as our current strains are derived from 1918 flu. Oosh. Yeah, we do need to send Drek a fleet of Iron Brew. Okay, random. What was the combined ordnance load of World War II era 500 bomber raid with the target Germany? B-25H has what, 75,000 pound loadout? How many to equal a 500 bomber raid? Let's go with Lancaster. And usually they did about 1,000 bomber raids, so we'll do that. Because also that will make my maths easier. That will make my maths easier. So, bum 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 bum. So Lancaster 1 could carry 14,000 pounds of bombs. So 1,000 bomber raid would carry 14 million pounds worth of bombs. A 75,000 pound bomb loadout, that's about 5 times, let's be honest, 5 times it. So 200 B-52Hs could equivalent to 1,000 Lancasters. Good lord, there are lots of questions here. And I've not got that much Iron Brew left, so please note it does end when the brew runs out. So if I don't get to all the questions, there are going to be more of these. There's going to be another one next week and then another one the week after. It's till the brew runs out. And one of the reasons is because I haven't eaten yet today, so I'm hungry. Dr. Z, what if the IJN launched a second Indian Ocean raid instead of going to Midway, so 2 months later? They'd have... it would have been interesting. The British and Americans would probably, with the intelligence gathering and the reorganization of fleets, have ended up catching them in a pincer movement at some point. So you could have ended up with 3 American carriers and 3 British carriers in 2 task forces ganging up on them. Come on, so your opinion about the Russian Star and Udalai just sailing around the Olympic Prince of Wales. That was very lucky of them to be there, but they weren't much problem where they were. The Frank Swaddowski, have you ever heard of the P6M Seamaster? Yes, I have. Representative Dr. Clarke, do you think Japan could have taken the East Indies without bombing Pearl Harbor? Nope. There is no scenario where Japan ends up in a war with in Southeast Asia where they do not end up fighting the Americans, in which case you might as well bomb Pearl Harbor. But it is a lot of force expended for not much gain on that one. I've always said there were other things they could have done to make Pearl Harbor far more sticky for the Americans. Graham Hanna, will the Prince of Wales go to Rosyth? The RN ship currently there is the Queen Elizabeth, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yeah, that's a problem. If we get the Queen Elizabeth out of dry dock earlier, then they might have finished her work. Measure it. Clear insufficient numbers of Glyn Stewart books. Although, interesting thing, I learnt that 98% of all books these days sell less than 5,000 copies. So the moment you're over 5,000 copies of your book sold, you're above 98% of the rest of the world, rest of book sales. Pretty darn cool. If I'm getting Tall Boys landing in by June 1941, I can do a lot of damage to various various German positions. A lot of damage. So anyway, what was the worst ship camouflage the AC used for ships? Some of the Dazzle stuff was actually it worked to an extent, but didn't work when you're dealing with close-up fighting. I'll get food once I finish all my own brew. Then I'll say goodnight to you all and go and get some food. Oh, well, yes, I know. The ravioli or spaghetti would have really offended the Italians, but then they had baked beans on hand. RG, Dr. Clarke, in Cold War, what would change if West Germany maintained its naval industry and the proper navy as a buffer state? Not really much. But they'd probably be fairly focused still on the Baltic. Franklin, is it possible for you to ever travel to the UK's claim over the Antarctica? Do you think it's a good idea to recognise that land as not belonging to anyone? I might discuss that at some point, and I might go for travelling now. What happened to your garden? Oh, no, it's not my garden. Oh, it's the blind's gone down. Sleeping poodle chucking ball for him. As sure, an 1805 fleet is a walking biological horror show. It would be interesting. Just wait until we trying to synthesize all the necessary vaccines for them. Imagine the COVID vaccine program they'd have to go on to. Major Dorsey, hello. How would the war in the Pacific look like if the Germans went to war with the Czechs in 1938 and bled so much they could and bled so much they cooed out Hitler and Nazis? If the Germans go in 1938, A, they're not really ready, and B, the Czechs could actually do that potentially. But what happens is if you're not fighting the Germans, you're probably the Italians don't go to war because Fat Boy Fun Boy isn't going to go to war solo. In which case, the Pacific War would be the entirety of the Royal Navy as of 1942 and the entirety of the US Navy of in the 1942 plan on 1942, whatever US Navy has in 1942, versus the Japanese in 1942. Because let's say it starts off in December 1941 again, the British, because of the way the scenario is set up, the British cannot afford to let the Americans fight the war against Japan alone and win, because that will mean the British will lose their position in the Far East. And the Americans cannot afford to let the British fight Japan and win, as that would affect them. So in the end, you've got Japan is always going to end up in a coalition versus Britain and America, with probably allies along for the ride. So you probably be talking about the Dutch and the French coming along as well. Maybe even the Italians, because Fat Boy Fun Boy would probably want to do that. Status, don't you know? What measures were taken to keep steamboat boilers from exploding in high energy, but on regular cleaning and meticulous inspection for cracks? Safety valves. A lot of the various valves, which are designed to, if the pressure reaches a certain level, they pop and let the pressure decrease. Our safety valves are the scenario they put in. So, how would the 1900 British Empire to the US react to the 2020 US coming back with their fleet in time? Panic, mass panic. It would take a long time to build up a fleet. They would be very, very worried. I'm not sure what they do, but they'd probably panic and worry quite a lot. G-Down, why didn't Willis pull rank and have the USS Washington's SG radar properly placed? It would have made a demonstrable difference in battle. Because he was a polite person, sadly enough. Excellent. Let's see. With too many commentators today claiming that tanks and helicopters are now obsolete, when do you think they start saying the men are now obsolete when they get hit? Oh, I don't listen to most commentators much. There's no real point. Sean Mac, also think about different things you could do to enhance bombing accuracy with the electronics in B-52s. Ooh. Peter Dawson, depends on what target. Most raids had heavy bombers carrying 10,000 pound load up. Agreed, most would have 10,000 pound load up, but the maximum normal load is roughly 14,000 pounds. So that's what I will go. That's what I was going for, because it's the maximum theoretical one. No, that wasn't it. You're talking 10,000 to 14,000. So again, you're just talking even less B-52s. I guess they need to suck it up now and tow Venezuela to France or USA for dry dock. They won't. There will be some way some fudge will be around, but it will have issues on things. And frankly, the fact that we haven't invested in a second dry dock is quite absurd. We do need another one. that can take that's able to be Navy 100% of the time, and it can be used for other ships. This is the point. You have a big dry dock which can do the carrier. Yes, that's great, but you can use it for other ships when you're not using it for the carrier. It doesn't always have to be full up with the carrier. It can take smaller ships. I've heard the Nimrod air submarine warfare aircraft was in some respects a flawed design. Yeah, it was. VC-10, I sort of answer. It would have just been just as flawed as the Nimrod. It could have been useful logistically to have one tanker transport an ASLD aircraft, but type aircraft, one aircraft for all those roles, but it would still have just been as flawed as Nimrod because they were trying to put things together in terms of a jet aircraft, and there were issues with the early technologies. Definitely. Weren't a lot of dazzle camo and similar pattern used by the British only useful against their type of rangefinder, which was not the same sort used by the Germans? No, there were some which were quite good against the German ones as well, once they figured that one out. Consider, do you have a master reading list for a different type of parts of naval history on both sides of something? No, but I do actually have some reading lists I've put together for various things, and I do keep considering posting them somewhere. Take care, Glenn. Paul Bestwick, Dr. Z, HMS Prince of Wales broke a Charles Covenant. HMS Queen Elizabeth alongside Portsmouth, but has her own tasking. Will take on some of Prince of Wales tasking, but not the further sailing, further rolling landing trials. Mm-hmm. That's good. Arian contrasts. Sometimes I wonder if keeping Musashi and Yamato secret was due to ninja influence or some other ancient Japanese military doctrine that doesn't make sense to do for naval ships. It was all sorts of weird politics going on about those ships. Sure, that being said, a fleet from the 1660s would potentially be nastier depending on who is correct on the plague. Was it actually Yersinia or a hemorrhagic virus? Ouch. Tech Mail, hello. Is there any evidence, any archaeological evidence for the Battle of Cape Economus? Tons. So, this battle was fought between the fleets of Carthage and Rome. And as you know, I've done a video on it. We have found some of the what do you call them? The rams, etc., used and during the battle. So we found some details about it archaeologically, but you're never going to find too much. But Carthaginian and Roman rams, mainly Roman rams, have been found, and of course the prows of the captured Carthaginian ships were sent into Rome to adorn the speaker's platform for them, and various other things. So we are fairly sure. We are as sure as we can be it happened from the accounts of the time and the information available. Actually, on the YouTube community tab, not yet. I'll put something up there. I have an old blog which I could reactivate called Amphibious Necessity. Have I caught up the questions? Have I skipped a load of questions? No, I don't think I've skipped a load of questions, but I think I have caught up with the questions. Woohoo! That's good timing because I've got about 2 glasses of iron brew left. One, probably. Give me a second. Please. I have more iron brew, so have till the bottle is finished. No, you're not caught up. I'm not caught up. Totally not caught up. Just give me a. I'm just going to give me a second because someone's waving at me. Do you mind covering for me? You will. Okay, good boy. Just wander in front of the camera and say hi. I know you'd like to do that. Seriously, I swear most people watch the channel for you. Oh, hey, no! Hello, boy. Go back. Hey, hello. All right. Mutiny of Doggos. Yes, there is a Mutiny of Doggos. Not sure I like the research assistant's lecture style. You've got a very good lecture style, don't you? You have very good lecture. I would never murder someone off camera. Murdering someone on camera would make for far more onward viewing figures. Liam Proctor, do you think that Darren should invest in these electric subs? Whilst I wish we never got out the game, now I never got out of that sort of thing. I think the extra large UV going down the route of are probably pretty much the stand-in for the SSKs that we can afford and we can go with, and we can fit in with our 4 structures. This is the kitchen. This is the kitchen. Oh, yeah. You good boy. Okay. Have you watched Peaky Blinders? And if you have, yes, what do you think about it? I enjoyed the Peaky Blinders. Hello, welcome to Running Mark Answers Questions Until the Biscuits Run Out. Yeah. Oh. What would Archie? What would in pure theory a German aircraft carrier of the Cold War era look like, assuming certain Graf Zeppelin's qualities are removed? Probably it would look like a Royal Navy light fleet carrier because they would probably end up buying a light fleet carrier. They might end up buying an American instead, but probably they would buy a light fleet carrier off the British. I know proper staff work and logistics may be boring, but they're keenly necessary to winning battles and ever was. Wars, stuff like yeah. And a vision. No, no, thank you for the donation. It's a legal defense fund. I'm fine. Chris, Research Assistant has found something far more interesting, more than squirrel. We use all kinds of measures, cups, a bunch of different spoons, grams. Yeah, I'm gonna need one someday. Uh, Actually, if you could pick five weapons technologies like Azon, the TQ-DR1 suicide drone act, what do you that you think were not fully utilized in Model 2? Which ones would you pick to further develop these? Hmm. Five, I'm not sure about off the top of my head because there are pros and cons to all of them. But I think the really interesting thing is the British had the potential to build their own version of a long lance torpedo with the 24-inch torpedoes that they made for Nelson and Romney. And I wish they had developed those more because I think it would have been good to have some heavyweight torpedoes on the Allies' side. I also have a feeling what they could have done would have been quite astronomically damaging. Christopher, was there something on the research since that elbow? Yes, he's hurt himself. He keeps. He seems to get this thing when he lies on on hard floors, and so we bring his bed out, and I bring his bed with him, but he doesn't. He still hurts himself because he ends up lying on the floor because he likes the cold, and it hurts his elbow. We're working on it. Um, we've got some special silver spray, etc., for it, which the vet gave recommended. Vision, I got to go back to work, but I'm glad I caught up a little bit of mystery scene, the hounds of the Clarks. There are many in this family. There are many. But I don't know. With the former USS Texas finally being dry docked, do you know any other museum ships that have had their propellers and shafts removed? Haida has. Uh, Belfast, I think. There are a few who've had it done. It's a good way of. It was at one point the pro forma way of how to maintain a museum ship. All right. Are Japanese really planning an improved Yamato class with 20-inch guns? Yes. I totally complete. They would likely have had good fire control radar. Well, now that is scary. It would have been certainly interesting. And Blazanki apparently has no props anymore. Shafts is still present, I think. If you they get them to buy a Central, then there's one more argument for the German Navy ordering the Buccaneer over the Starfighter. There should have been many arguments for ordering the Buccaneer over the Starfighter. Most of all, being, do you want your crew to actually live? Do you like your pilots? Also, do you think British UK defence spending will reach 3%? Honestly, I would hope it would, but it will have to see what governments do. And I think they've also taken some of the things off. Mm, Flower class. Oh, good lord. Sackville. Hi, Jack Ray. Leonidas. Hello. The effect of the RN having a couple of extra carries is something I think about my third Republic of Texas notebook. But I'm interested on your thoughts on this, dear. On this, dear. Your thoughts on this, dear Brock. It depends when you're talking about. If you're talking about having a couple extra carries today, it'd be really useful. If you're talking about a couple extra carries at the beginning of World War II, it's really useful. Pretty much any point you have them, a couple extra carries is useful. You just have to have the escorts. You have to have the support infrastructure in place to support them, so you can use them properly. Then parts, Dan. If that was the only option, Drac would have reviewed his scuba training and reinstalled the props. Well, both of us could do that. Just to have some more fun. In other news, I'm off to the beach for a week with a friend tomorrow. Cool, have fun. Night 6 everyone. I'm glad F1 is done. I'm on my last glass of Iron Bro. Just a heads up. Okay, so my mini husky ends up with those elbow calluses too. Prefers to lie on a tile to a bed most times. I know it's annoying. You know it's hurting them, but they still do it. It's why my office now has carpet. Alright, read any good books lately? Actually quite a few, but I've just this afternoon, while I was driving along, I had an audiobook playing, which was the Lehman Russ book from the patriarchs of the Horus Heresy sort of series, and I was rather enjoyed that. I haven't really read those ones in order, but the fight scene in it was pretty darn good. And it's done in a very clever way. I liked the way it was woven around the story of the axe. I'm not trying to give well not way too much about it. So if you haven't read it, you don't get it spoiled. But I enjoyed. I've read the Roberto Gilliman book. This was the first one I did as an audiobook because, well, honestly, Thrak has kept telling me I need to try audiobooks, and he's a really good friend, so I listened to him and I gave it a go. Nice to meet everyone. If Conqueror had sunk Belgrano and both her escorts, how much worse it for Argentina? And could Conqueror have sunk the Sedutus escorting destroyers? She could have done. And worse for Argentina, well, it takes out a huge chunk of their fleet. Unhonorable. I reckon some Marines have had their propeller arms removed. Dinopods, why did I rip the props off? Dissimilar metals? It's to do with weights and balances in the hull. Take care, Tizzy. Sonic and Aaron. How to get your hands on a starfighter as a civilian. Buy some land and wait. Yep, sadly enough. Alzaski, I think that the ORP Bazankia propellers are in the same place, but they're useless anyway. The route goes through through one of the boilers. It's been cut through. Whoosh. Why would you cut through the boiler on a ship? That's just that's that that's just the part of me which likes to show students engineering and would love to get pictures of it, would love to get pictures of it, but there's also the part of me which is horrified of it. It's kind of like in the Sackville. I was really happy because there had been beams cut out of the way because it gave me a good picture of the room. But I was also really annoyed that there had been beams cut out of the way. Mm-hmm. Um, and reports some news, and please pardon me if this has already been covered. India commissioned its first indigenously built carrier 2 days back. She carries forward the name of India's first carrier. Yes. A Majestic class carrier, 1942 design light fleet carrier variety. That ship was also last surviving 1942 light fleet carrier. Yes, it was, and it's cool. I have answered questions on her previously from the last bum, 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 the live on Friday, but it's cool. Nights ago, one of Belgrano's escorts had a hemispheric impression in its hull, indicative of a torpedo which failed to detonate. What you suggest was really close to happening in real life. Yep. Track does want a refresher to do things legally, and that would be similar for me. Hmm. I have two. Simple question. What book would you recommend to someone interested in learning more about CVA 1 class? Norman Friedman's British Aircraft Carriers. It's probably the best one to start off with. That gives you all the source material to go and find other things as well, and puts it in context. Although, do remember that context is being put in by someone who is in the context of being an American writing in the middle of in the height of the Cold War, and is obsessed with carriers of the American style. This is not this is a point. Please note that's not saying it's bad. That's just saying you remember that the background criteria and adjust accordingly, and you've got an absolutely exceptional book. So anyway, have you ever watched Peaky Blinders? What do you think of it? I like it. Um, Dry response. It's the boiler blue, so now you get a tour of an air boiler. She could use two boilers, cruise speed, but the other two are probably dead anyway due to the age and lack of maintenance or after decommissioning. Well, we'd have to figure out. I'm trying to find it. It's one of the designs from being a member of the channel. I don't get saying which. No, I design custom emojis we get. I have I think I'm about four more channel members away from having to design another one. How stupid is the idea of an animal class battle carrier nailing a 30 planes? Why would you want to do that? Do it a proper carrier. Don't do it as a battle carrier because then you just lose tonnage from two different things in the treaty system. Why did Conqueror's third torpedo fail to inflict a fatal blow on one of the Belgrano's escorts? Sounds like it didn't actually go off. And considering they were World War II Mark 8s, the fact that two worked and one didn't is probably pretty darn cool. And great for the level of quality and maintenance and skills going on. I think Britannia still has a props, but they have cut out I have now finished Iron Brew, so last questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and thank you for all the super chats and support. As always, none of this would be possible without you guys. All the traveling around I'm doing now, which will produce some videos as well next time, and probably some 60-second videos while I'm down here as well. And wandering the other place I'm wandering to during this period, and well, two places I'm wandering to this period, and going back home and wandering out again. It's going to be an interesting few weeks. Yeah, it wouldn't be happening without you guys. So thank you very much for all that. It just wouldn't. So thank you. Are you familiar with the USN's Mark 14 torpedoes exploder? Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Clarke. I have to go now. Take care, Danny, right? I'm going to, before we finish though this evening, I'm also going to announce the winners of the Patreon vote. My name tag does look like an old CD. I think that's the old design of the design, the warship design sort of triangle. Congressman, Mark 8 and Conqueror, is there any official report indicating the escorts were attacked? No, but official RN reports on these things are always interesting to read. That's ignorant. If this, it's probably they fired the 3 torpedoes, and well, what do you know? One targeted one the nearest escort. That is a surprise. That is such a surprise. Okay. Votes is Ian Carr, escort carriers, the ideas, design, development, and naval operations. And Daniel Freeman's What if the French Navy had left France and carried on the fight in 1940? Both 17 and 14 votes. We've got 2 with 12, though, which was Diesel Kriegsmarine got 12. And the History of the SBS got 12. So I might well write up them as well and do them as specials at some point. Because I am going to go back to some of the notable not winners and give them write-ups at some point. But yes, the winners so far, the winners as they are actually, with 17 votes in Cars, Escort Carriers, the idea, designs, development, and notable in operations. And with 14, Daniel Freeman's What if the French Navy had left France and carried on the fight in 1940? Nice agreement. Why was the US that surprised the Iran was still using biplanes? They weren't that surprised. A lot of that surprise engineered post World War II. You have to remember in 1939, the US Navy still has biplanes wandering around. So the idea the US is still surprised the RN still has biplanes is quite a shock to them, quite a shock to our system. It's something which is created post World War II, and even the US acknowledged that the Swordfish had some very good advantages for why you kept it in service and the operations you did. Albacore less so, but yeah. First one, does it any further future travels to naval ships, battlefields, museums abroad? Yeah, we're slowly working on. We're going to be announcing more details about it soon, but we're planning a trip to Australia, so working on that. But all details will be announced later on. We've got to do some meetups and working details out. But I think it could well be the same for going together. Hopefully. Thank you, Drakenred. Thank you, Calvin Gosberg. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Mikey Newman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Right. Nice to great front. If the Super Lion's being built, what do you replace the 916 guns? As it's not enough firepower for a ship its size, aka you probably leave it at 916-inch guns because it's probably going to get added other stuff to it. Yes, but also think about build prompts actually getting to be recorded by all 3 of us sitting in a pub. Take care, Tanif. Thank you, Frank Spazado. Thank you. And try and do a stream on HMS for Oh, yeah, we'd love to do that. Take care, everyone. Dirt Squad. Thank you. Thank you, Safford. Thank you, John Sykes. Thank you, Tanif. Thank you, Vargated tonight. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your support. Thank you, Mike Newman. I'm now hungry, so I'm going to get some food. I haven't eaten for a very, very long time. I think you missed this one. Favorite could have been ship and naval aircraft. Ship Malta class carriers, because I just like to see British produce them and what they would have compared to in terms of midways. And naval aircraft, the original Supermarine Seafire, the one that would have been come into service in about 1940. I really would have liked that fighter for the fleet era because I think it might have changed quite a lot of things in World War II in terms of the Mediterranean. I was asking you, don't through my photo archive. I don't have a photo of the boiler inside when I was last on the Swanker. Oh dear. Don't worry. Just one episode? Many episodes probably coming up. Wait, all three of you all in a pub at the same time? Yeah. Where are you going to find a pub well built enough to not implode from the critical mass? Hopefully Australia has one. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and have fun. Bye. And yes, if we do it, we will tell everyone in advance. So if people want to come and sit while we're just doing bilge pumps live from a pub, you'd be more than welcome to come and join. Take care, everyone. Thank you and have a nice evening.